Welcome to another edition of the Big News Roundup. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Wealthy New York City residents are up in arms after local officials announced plans to put a controversial homeless shelter in their upscale neighborhood. Former Vice President Kamala Harris effusively praises anti-ICE efforts in Minnesota, proudly claiming that she encourages intolerance as a method of resistance to the Trump administration. And on Capitol Hill, House Republicans are sounding the alarm after they uncover a widespread epidemic of health care fraud sweeping across our entire nation. Also, nutrition experts link a terrifying new side effect to a number of popular weight loss drugs. And a Hollywood actress reveals how working on The Simpsons may have actually saved her life after she fell down the stairs and broke her neck. All this and a bunch more, it's coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin in the Big Apple, where some of New York City's wealthiest residents are understandably enraged after local officials announced plans to install a controversial homeless shelter and right in the middle of their exclusive neighborhood. Now, according to reports, a bunch of angry citizens in the ritzy Upper East Side district of Manhattan were completely blindsided and immediately infuriated when a local community board initially made their scheme public just a couple of short weeks ago, giving them very little time to react. At first, the board revealed plans to install a 200-bed facility for homeless men directly in the heart of the swanky neighborhood before opening it for business early next month. After changing their minds, they now say the shelter will house single women only, that it's going to be the first of its kind in the district, and that it's going to be opening up in April instead. Well, as you might expect, public outrage concerning the move kicked into overdrive almost instantly, with angry locals gathering thousands of petition signatures to oppose the facility while loudly voicing their concerns over safety issues, a lack of transparency in the planning process, and a bunch more. Now, among their chief worries, that the shelter is located in close proximity to a Home Depot warehouse where disturbed homeless people, they'd be able to easily get their hands on a variety of potentially dangerous makeshift weapons. What are they going to get? A bucket of paint and some lumber? They also point out that the shelter is right around the corner from a number of schools and daycare centers as well, a valid concern. Furthermore, some people now pinning the blame squarely on the shoulders of the city's new mayor, Zoran Mamdani. Yeah, Mamdani strikes again. They say that even though they're lifelong Democrats, it's entirely disheartening to see these kinds of irresponsible decisions picking up steam under his burgeoning socialist regime. Now, for their part, Mamdani's Department of Homeless Services is defending the new facility with all their might. They say there's currently no time limit required for notifying people about new homeless shelters, that the 8th-floor facility will be highly secure and patrolled by dozens of professional staff members as well, and that residents will be forced to adhere to a very strict protocol concerning drugs, alcohol, also visitors, and, as you can imagine, a bunch more. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. There's something in life called the NIMBY paradox. Get to that in just a bit. Now, look, here's the deal. It's a new world. There are homeless people everywhere. It's a crisis, and everyone agrees that something's got to be done. Most people, likewise, also agree that homeless shelters are a great way to get people off the streets, and it's only humane to lend a hand to those who are down on their luck. Now, look at what the shelters do. They give the unhoused a short-term place to stay, some grub for their belly, a hot shower, and a bunch more. Most of the shelters, they're free. And so, if you play by the rules, curfew, sobriety, and some other junk, it's an unbeatable deal. And in my mind, everybody wins. There's also this. When people go into the homeless shelters, they're off the streets, away from drugs. They're being fed and maybe even getting some job counseling or some training. Basically, they're getting a free do-over and a second chance at life, and that benefits absolutely everybody. The only conflict is as we mentioned, the NIMBY paradox. The rich folks on the Upper East Side of New York, they're 2 thumbs up on homeless shelters over there in Brooklyn or the Bronx or East Harlem. But NIMBY, not in my backyard. That means no shelters in fancy zip codes. I say calm down, think this through, don't be daft, and you gotta have a heart. Homeless people can suffer on the street. They can freeze, starve, panhandle, and be a health and safety hazard in your neighborhood. Or they can live a life of dignity, score a chance to get back in the game in a respectable, warm, and cozy, safe environment. Again, think it through. All right, change of course now and shift our focus to the situation in Minnesota, where thankfully the unsettling conflict between professional agitators and ICE agents finally seems to be simmering down once and for all, despite pitiful efforts by a leading Democrat to stir the pot and keep it going by encouraging her followers to actively resist the Trump administration at every single turn. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the program the Honorable cackling Kamala Harris. The family calls her Momala. In yet another desperate bid to stay relevant. Keep on trying, honey. Former Vice President Kamala Harris now heaping tons of praise on the insurrectionists in Minneapolis, calling their recent resistance to law enforcement a beautiful example for our entire nation to follow. No kidding. Yeah, it's all lollipops and roses when that fabulous woman just rambles on. In the latest boring stop on her never-ending book tour, Harris says there are pivotal moments in our lives when we simply must put our foot down, be completely intolerant to what's going on, and let the world know we're not going to let it continue any longer. Sounds like that Twisted Sister song, We're Not Going to Take It. You know, she'd be a great lead singer or maybe a lead cackler for that band. Now, to prove her point, she proudly brags about what's been going on throughout the entire Minneapolis area concerning federal immigration enforcement. Says a bunch of people who don't necessarily know each other, they've been joining forces to save their community from ICE agents by blowing whistles. Well, that'll show them. Also taking video with their smartphones and looking out for their neighbors as well. Additionally, Harris says she plans to continue advocating for intolerance against the Trump regime wherever she goes in the future. Yeah, we get it. If you can't win, then nobody else can either. Good strategy. She says that right now, a large number of Americans are understandably afraid and full of anxiety about what's happening in our country. And as a result, she says it's now time for them to take back their power and reclaim America. And look at her trying to start her own little war. That's just fantastic. Furthermore, the former VP, the former vice, also argues that now more than ever, it's extremely urgent for people to stand up and fight for both the principles they hold dear and the ideals upon which the U.S. was originally founded. And maybe I missed that part when I was in school, the part about violently fighting federal law enforcement officers and generating chaos. Maybe I was absent on that day. In the meantime, Border Czar Tom Homan now says that with President Trump's approval, ICE is finally ending its Metro Surge operation in Minneapolis and the entire area, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Says that in the end, the mission was extremely successful, that it made the entire Twin Cities area much safer by arresting a number of violent criminal aliens. And that despite the drawdown, his agency plans to continue their mass deportation efforts until they get the job done. And sorry if that ruins your little tea party, Madam Harris. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Here's the deal, and I've always said this. Whenever you're looking for sage advice, it's always best to turn to Kamala Harris on account of she just gets it. Her exact words regarding Minnesota, resistance to recent immigration enforcement efforts. It's such a beautiful example for the United States. Sure, every bit as beautiful as a toxic landfill, almost as delightful as a 5 million gallon oil spill off the coast of California. We actually had one of those, maybe two of those. And nearly as brilliant as ejection seats in helicopters. This Kamala Harris, she's one bright cookie. And back to that beautiful resistance thing she was yakking about. And if I recall correctly, federal law enforcement agents who were tracking down illegal immigrants, some of whom, by the way, were violent criminals, and attempting to take them into custody, those are the guys who were attacked by violent mobs in Minneapolis. They were assaulted. Their vehicles were destroyed. There were fights. There was property destruction, businesses shut down, and you'll recall 2 people were killed. And there's even more. How's that resistance thing working out for you, Kamala Harris? Just kind of thinking out loud.
We push to move forward, that we are guided by what we see that can be, unburdened by what has been.
What the hell are you talking about? Who are you talking to?
Now, just to reiterate, cackling Kamala, the worst U.S. vice president in our history of the country and a failed presidential candidate simply wants to school you on how beautiful it is to resist federal law enforcement efforts. And I'm just thinking out loud, but Kamala Harris for president, 2028. What say you? And if you don't mind, leave us a comment here. Does she get your vote? All right, change things up just a bit. Turn our attention now to a shocking revelation from federal lawmakers concerning the alarming extent of the staggering healthcare fraud which is currently plaguing our nation. You got to hear this. According to a new report, Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives have now uncovered an absolute epidemic of Medicare and Medicaid abuse, which they say stretches from coast to coast across our entire country. The way I see it, our nation needs an industrial-sized Band-Aid and a big, giant bucket of Bactine. The report says those lawmakers, they now have proof that our country's massive fraud problem extends far beyond the well-known billions of dollars worth of stolen taxpayer money, which has been discovered in both Minnesota and California. As proof, they point to a case in Florida dealing with a foreign national from Cuba who was recently sentenced for participating in a $3 million Medicare fraud scheme, as well as a healthcare center in New Jersey that operated without a medical license. How do you do that? While sending thousands of fraudulent bills to the state's Medicaid program. Additionally, they also mentioned another scheme in New York involving an international organized crime syndicate that has allegedly stolen the IDs of more than 1 million Americans from all 50 states. This impacts everybody. They're on their way to submitting over $10 billion in fake Medicare claims all across the country. House Republicans say what they're finding proves that what's going on with the Somali-run scams in Minnesota is truly just the tip of the iceberg. Or as they say in those old Ronco infomercials. But wait, there's more. They now say it's obvious that these types of schemes have been going on for decades now, that they've been relying on a number of similar strategies, including overbilling, forgery, and the creation of fake companies, and that in the end, they steal vital resources from the patients who really need them. Additionally, they also point to a different kind of fraud, which involves people who double dip by signing up for both Medicaid and Obamacare at the same time, thus receiving extra benefits, adding up to nearly $15 billion in waste each and every year. And we hope you're as outraged by this as we are. It's your dough that they are getting rich off of. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. It's a bizarre world we live in. Now, we're the country that actually created flying machines. We're a bright bunch. We invented the airplanes. We're the nation that invented the nuclear bomb, and that kind of changed the world, the way I see it. And more than a half a century ago, we sent a rocket ship into outer space and landed on another planet. Now, some fellows from that spaceship, by the way, used a flip phone and even talked to President Nixon. Editor Pranov the Magnificent, can we tap into that call, please?
I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you... For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here.
So, the convo, it's kind of short because in those days there were no unlimited plans and you paid by the minute, and long-distance charges, the moon in Washington, D.C. is kind of pricey. There's also a vicious rumor floating around town that says the U.S. invented the internet. That little contraption has absolutely revolutionized the whole wide world. And so, that's what the WWW stands for when you visit a website. Whole wide world. Yeah, it's a thing. I know a great deal about computer stuff. Now, with all that knowledge, know-how, and downright genius, you'd kind of think that somebody would develop a game plan to ensure that virtually everybody would be stopped dead in their tracks before they swindled even 1 red cent of taxpayer funds from our state and our federal government. Far too many of our fellow Americans struggling, going nearly broke every month, trying to afford medical insurance for themselves and their family, while others are stealing billions and billions. And that just makes everything dreadful for absolutely everybody. All that stolen dough could have been used, and just one example, for VA benefits. And nobody is more deserving of medical care than our nation's veterans. By the way, as bad as everything is in Minnesota, it's just as bad, as you now know, in a number of other states as well. And the only way to rein in that fraud is to allow the Trump administration to take drastic measures to stop the madness. And terribly sorry you had to hear that, Kamala Harris. We know how much you just adore chaos. Our turn now to an alarming report which claims that right now the Chinese Communist Party waging an undeclared war against the U.S. right here on American soil. And even worse, we don't seem to be doing a darn thing about it. The report says that a number of specific incidents show exactly how China is actively aiming to undermine our entire society by potentially preparing to commit sabotage on our homeland. Yeah, you got to hear this. As proof, they point to the FBI's recent discovery of a China-linked biological laboratory in a Las Vegas home, which was allegedly experimenting with a number of deadly infectious diseases, all for the potential purpose of releasing them on the American people. And I wonder if you really think the CCP, would they actually really try to harm Americans with a deadly infectious disease? I don't think that's ever happened in our history. I'll have to think about that one just a bit. Now, when combined with the previous discovery of a similar lab in California, China's America-based propaganda efforts, and Chinese operatives who've been caught red-handed buying land near U.S. military bases, experts warn that the CCP currently getting ready to wreak havoc on our homeland if our two nations ever go to war. Now, some additional headlines also keeping a very close watch on here in the sprawling News Roundup newsroom. First up in Washington, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives has just narrowly passed the Save America Act, which would require voters like you and I and everybody else to show a government-approved ID in order to take part in federal elections. Kind of common sense to me. Meanwhile, the House has also narrowly voted to block President Trump's tariffs on our neighbor to the north, that would be Canada, and both of these measures are now heading to the Senate. Moving along, a U.S. Navy warship just collided with a nearby Navy supply vessel during a refueling operation in the seas off of South America. How'd that happen? It's a pretty big ocean. 2 people reportedly suffering minor injuries as a result of the incident, while both ships continue to sail safely away. You know, Captain Crunch and Sinbad the Sailor never crashed to each other. It might be time, if I think about it, might be time for some of that recurrent training. And turning now to the world of health, according to new reports, people who use popular weight loss drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic are now increasingly being diagnosed with a malnutrition-related disease called scurvy. Somebody needs 500 cc's of vitamin C. And now a quick gander and a bit of showbiz news. We'll kick things off today with a Titanic update for fans of Goodfellas, The Departed, and old Blue Eyes himself. According to reports, Hollywood heartthrob Leonardo Dicaprio now confirming that plans are still in the works for him to play legendary crooner Frank Sinatra in a future biopic directed by his good pal, the one and only Martin Scorsese. Now, I'm a big fan of that Frank Sinatra fella, and if you don't know who he is, in his day, he was more popular than Justin Bieber, the Biebs, Naughty Bunny, and Britney Spears all wrapped up into one. He was that big. So you go ahead and you make your little movie, but not with DiCaprio. He's no Sinatra. He was a fine Howard Hughes, but Drew Barrymore would be a better Sinatra than Leo. And I say back to the drawing board and recast this little disaster. Turn now to the animated world of TV, and an amazing story revealing the longest-running cartoon show in American history might have actually been responsible for saving an actor's life. Performer Yeardley Smith, who voices the legendary character of Lisa on The Simpsons, says that nearly 10 years ago, she almost died when she fell down the stairs and broke her neck. However, she says she was able to pull through and make a full recovery thanks to her decades-long voice work on the popular program, which will soon reach an astounding 800 episodes and no end in sight. You know, the weird thing is that show is in season number 37. Nobody on that program has aged a bit. And Maggie, little baby Magpie, is still in diapers. Also had no idea that Lisa Simpson broke her neck a few seasons back, but it's good to know she's in good health, still wailing away on that sax and woofing down those tofu and cucumber salads. Long live The Simpsons. And since we're on The Simpsons, Editor Pronoff, can we have a dough, please?
Dough!
And how about a don't have a cow, man?
Don't have a cow, man.
And don't be stingy with groundskeeper Willie. You know he's my favorite character on that program.
Willie hears ya. Willie don't care.
And now time to call it a wrap on the big news roundups. Have an awesome day today. Stay safe. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that little subscribe button right there. It's pretty easy. With that, we're going to dim the lights and fade to black, and we'll see you right back here next time for another episode of the Big News Roundup.